A lot of things can grieve us. Lots of things hurt us. Lots of things take your sleep away from you. But this has been a rule all through the Scriptures where we could find that even David himself, as he has spoken about some of the incidents or some of the experiences that he had when he referred to it as being that he did it in the nighttime or when he was asleep or upon his bed. And sometimes things can come which in life that they hurt deeply. The verse 13 says in Philippians chapter 2 says, "For it is God which worketh in you both the will and to do of his good pleasure." And well would it be that if we learned nothing else, that we would learn this, that if we are vessels, and we are, God made us this way when he created us in order that we would be vessels that could contain him to live within us. And if he is within us, and he can be in us, and if you are a child of God, the life of the Lord is in you, and that means Emmanuel is in you. And if he is in you, he'll work in you, and he'll do in you of his good pleasure to fulfill what verse 13 says in 2 Philippians chapter 2. For it is God which worketh in you both the will and to do of his good pleasure. Now, let's read it again. For it is God which works, correct, within you. Doing what? To both will and to do of his good pleasure. Well, that is the fulfillment also of what is taught in the 2nd chapter of the book of Philippians, where that it is that salvation is by grace, that it is not of one's own efforts nor one's own doings or our own works, but that it is a gift of God, lest any of us would be able to boast about what it is that we've done, but it is to be done by the fact that Jesus Christ himself is going to be the workman and we're going to be his workmanship. But he's the worker. He's the one that does the work. But I'll say again that in spite of everything that there is about us as human beings, and regardless of what it is that we learn, we need to sit at that table as we did last week and be reminded this is his work. And he does his work. Praise his wonderful name. It'll be to the glory of his grace when it is that he does. And he does his work in us, both as it is stated, that it is to be according to his will, and he does his work according to his good pleasure. And verse 14 is, if nothing else, when I would stand in his presence, it would seem to me that if he were to bring this up, that in our lives as believers that we're to do all things without murmuring and disputing. I'm going to tell you right now that in itself is as great a proclamation as perhaps could be made. Because when you begin to study the Word of God and you find out how that it is when it was that there were those that were the children of God in the olden days, what happened to them when they murmured and complained and disputed. Well, we'll leave this one alone and go on, that we might go to the 16th verse and close our thoughts here this morning. Well, that you may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God, without rebuke in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Which I suppose that if I have had it said to me one time, I've had it said to me to be perhaps maybe thousands of times, that there is no way that this can be. Perhaps maybe like the young boy that had the 3 containers, wanting to have 7 gallons of water, and you would have had to have a little bit of, it had to work this out in order for it to happen. It would have to be worked out, but in his mind it came to him that it was possible to be done. And he figured it out, and he got 7 gallons of water, and he took it back and he gave it to his dad, and his dad said, "I'm pleased, son, that you did this." Do you believe the children of God can be blameless and harmless, the sons of God, without rebuke in the midst of this crooked and perverse world we live in? Well, I believe we can. If it is him that works in us, both the will and the do of his good pleasure. But it can't be done in any other way. But so it is few thoughts concerning these few things and wanting to not be lengthy. And I'm not going to be lengthy unless that it would be that I would completely lose a little bit of sense of the Spirit that is within me, which all men must have if they're to do the if they're to do the will of God. They must have some type of control over their own spirit. For a man that is a prophet, he must have some capability over his own spirit. For if he didn't, he'd say things he shouldn't say. He'd figure out things he ought not to be figuring out. He'd do things he ought not to be doing. And I don't want us to be lengthy this morning. Holding forth the word of life, that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain, neither labored in vain. As far as I know, ministers are nothing more than men whom they've been chosen to be servants to the children of God. And to be servant unto the Lord, first of all, to do his will, and then the Lord's will is that the servant help his children. Then he wants his children to know that there's nothing that the Lord won't do for us in providing us the grace that we all need, in order that we can do what it says in verse 16, to hold forth the word of life. Well, so I want to think about us being vessels for just a moment and try to hurry to close this morning. Do we know that we are vessels, first of all? Well, there was a 3-gallon vessel and there was a 5-gallon vessel that a man gave his son, told him to get the 7 gallons of water, and his son figured that out, and he got those 7 gallons of water. Do we know that we're vessels? God made us that way. When God made man, and he did make man, and if there are those here today that might be having in your mind a doubt as to whether or not that man's on this earth by way of evolution, or whether it is that it is in a correct account written in the book of Genesis, God made man and put him upon this earth. And he made him to be a vessel so that he could be in him. So God could himself indwell the man that he had made. And by being in the man, by his life being in the man, then the man could be in the image and likeness of God. Well, verse 16 tells us that we are to be those who hold forth the word of life. Well, somebody would say, well, there's a lot has to be done in order to, this is a message which that if it were so be that you wanted to preach from it at length you could, but in order to be able to hold forth the word of life, something drastically has to happen to human beings. Because when it was that man did the thing that God said that if you do it, my life will leave out of you. You're a vessel with my life in you, but if you disobey me and you do the thing which I tell you not to do, my life will leave out of it and you'll die spiritually. Adam did that. And the Lord's life left out of him. Without the life of the Lord in the man, without the life of the Lord being in the man, then man cannot hold forth the life of God. No one can. I don't care who they are. It's an impossibility for it to be done. But it can be done if his life can be restored unto us, and that's really what salvation is. And when it is that we would ask those, let me close my Bible and not go to, because if I go further, then I'm going to take more time than what I made it. But my mind, as I sat in my basement this morning at an early hour and prayed and studied, that I wouldn't go past 12:15.